That's going to be the biggest thing of how to emphasize whether people want to go supercharger or whether they want to go turbocharger, right? Because you're going to have two separate power bands. So with the supercharger, I always tell clients it's more of a magnified, naturally aspirated graph or power band. So basically, what does that mean? So if your power is like this NA, when you're supercharged, it's just going to go from here and it's going to go to here is what it's going to do. And so if you still like that natural gradual increase of power, supercharger's your way.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't and you want something more aggressive, then obviously turbo is going to be your way, because you're still going to get that increase in power on the top end. It's just this down here on the bottom is going to be more magnified because the torque is going to come in and it's going to hit harder. And so it'll come in and it'll hit harder and then it'll carry the power is what it'll do. And so determining what kind of power band you want is going to be the ultimate decision as to if you want to go turbocharger or if you want to go supercharger.
Hey guys, this is Elziah from SOHO Motorsports, and this is the SOHO podcast where we'll be discussing everything VQ related. Today, again, we have Nick for part 2, and we'll be discussing topics of the week. So first topic, jumping in, tuning aspect, Uprev versus ECU. What do you recommend to clients?
So that's a good question, right? Because we always get asked that all the time. So each software is going to have its pros and its cons, right? So I'll start first with the Uprev software. So Uprev is going to be primarily for the vehicles that are from 03 to about 08. So that'll include 350Z, G35, and some G37s. Now, the ECU software is going to be for cars that are 09 and newer, just because of the size of the computer that's needed to allow the ECU software to work. Now, that's not to say that some cars that are 09 and newer cannot run the Uprev software. You still can, right? It's just ECU is not able to work, to be able to function on cars that are older than 09, if that makes sense, right? Correct. So let's talk about some of the pros for the Uprev software. So Uprev is a great software. I mean, all my DE guys, you guys are aware that the Uprev is the only way that you have right now. So it's a great software. They added the ARC patch on top of it, which allows you to do more of the simplified timing, which allows the timing to be a little bit more accurate than how it was before. Because before it was based off of time. Now it's actually based off of a number. So if you put 15 degrees, it's going to say 15 degrees. Whereas before it was like 38 milliseconds before top dead center, and it had to figure this out in different RPM range. It was just it was a nightmare. And then you had to understand how that worked to be able to tune them that way. So going back to the Uprev now, when they added the ARC patch, that also allowed obviously the simplified timing. You can do the burnout mod, you can do the rolling anti-lag, you can do the launch control. There are a number of bells and whistles that were added on top whenever you got tuned. So all the guys that wanted to be rowdy and do wild stuff, and then obviously you got the ARC patch, the burnout mod, and you're able to make that work. Now, when going to the ECU software, the burnout mod and obviously the rolling anti-lag, all those, they don't come with the ECU software. However, with the ECU software, you're able to make that work with custom mapping. You see what I'm saying? So
there's more. Is there more space to work with on ECU than Uprev?
Yeah. So there's more space to work with, but it takes a little bit more to get it to work.
Okay.
Whereas on Uprev, it's literally you click a few buttons and it basically turns it on. And obviously, you're going to have to modify for like rolling anti-lag and launch control based off if you're boosted or not, how much that's going to work. Because if you leave it on stock settings, it's not going to work properly. So there's some work that has to be done in regards to allowing that to work. So Uprev, great software for the DE guys, the HR guys as well too. And so that's all they have. Now, basically, the ECU software, like I was saying, is 09 and newer. And so with the ECU software, you can do, what we've found actually is we see a little bit more power increase over the Uprev software based off our experience. So, for example, if a car comes in, he's Uprev, and then we switch him over to ECU, we'll see an increase about 5 to 10 wheel on average.
Just from the tune. Just from
the tune, because the software is a little bit more of a better software when it comes to certain parameters and adjusting certain parameters. And so, and this is not a diss to Uprev or anything like that. This is just based off what we've seen on our experience, what we found and what we've seen, and that's what we've seen. Now, jumping back to the ECU software, like I was saying, you can do the custom mapping you can have some of the launch control and the flat foot shifting if your vehicle has a sync rev, like the Nismo models, 370Zs. If they have like the little S button, you can turn that on. Obviously, will allow you to do launch control and flat foot shifting. Now, if you don't, you can incorporate some of those parameters through the custom mapping because you have about 16 custom maps on the ECUTech software. So
for our G37 guys, our 08 guys, is there a way that you guys offer ECUTech?
So yeah, for the 08 guys, if you're a manual or an auto, what you can do is you can do the 09 ECU upgrade, which basically you would get an 09 ECU out of a 09 G37, whether it's an automatic or a manual, and they would plug into it as long as you have the VHR engine. Like you can't put the VHR ECU and have the HR engine. Yeah. It's just not going to jive. And you can't do it if you have a 5AT. So if you're going to do the 09 ECU, you're going to have to make sure you have the 7AT if you wanted to upgrade to the 09 ECU.
Okay. So another question that we get is we do a lot of boosted cars, boosted applications from turbos to superchargers. A lot of people want to know what's the prior maintenance that you should do to your vehicle before you going boost, essentially.
And it's a valid question. A lot of guys, they think, okay, before I go boost, I mean, if somebody were to ask you, what would you say?
Gallery gaskets is always, you can't go wrong with gallery gaskets. It's
correct.
Make or break.
And that's typically when we see motors fail, it's typically because the oil gallery gaskets failed. They do good when they're NA, and as soon as you start putting boost to them, it basically kills the oil gallery gaskets and causes the motor to fail. And they'll fail in the same exact spot on the backside of the motor every single time.
Do you think it's a common thing that's overlooked? A lot of people don't know about?
Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of people, the more and more information gets out, the more and more people are aware of it, right? So if we can advise people like, hey, this is what we've seen, and a lot of other people in the community have discussed this as well. We're not the first to discuss this. So a lot of people have brought this situation up, but I think it gets to a point where it's more magnified now because a lot more people are starting to see that failure. And a lot of the issues that were happening were in pre-14 engines. So you got to think we're almost 10 years.
Yeah.
It's a paper gasket.
Correct.
And it's going to fail. Before it was like, 2019, you were 5 years, right? It didn't matter. But now as we're getting 10 years plus, you're starting to see those failures become a more common issue.
Yeah, it's a longevity issue pretty much.
Correct. Once again, like the BMW rod bearings, right? 100,000 miles?
For since we're on the boost topic, a lot of people come in, they ask, what should I do, turbo or supercharger? What do you think? What are the pros and cons of both?
Well, I'll bounce this back to you. So you've driven both.
Okay.
So what is your preference on them?
I was a supercharger guy, like at heart at first.
Okay.
And it's amazing and it's great, but you really can't beat turbo. It's just for how the power comes in, the power delivery is just a whole different.
That's going to be the biggest thing of how to emphasize whether people want to go supercharger or whether they want to go turbocharger, right? Because you're going to have two separate power bands. So with the supercharger, I always tell clients it's more of a magnified, naturally aspirated graph or power band. So basically, what does that mean? So if your power is like this NA, when you're supercharged, it's just going to go from here and it's going to go to here. Is what it's going to do. And so if you still like that natural gradual increase of power, supercharger's your way.
Yeah.
Right? And if you don't and you want something more aggressive, then obviously turbo is going to be your way because you're still going to get that increase in power on the top end. It's just this down here on the bottom is going to be more magnified because the torque is going to come in and it's going to hit harder. And so it'll come in and it'll hit harder and then it'll carry the power is what it'll do. And so determining what kind of power band you want is going to be the ultimate decision as to if you want to go turbocharger or if you want to go supercharger.
Even just in turbo and supercharger, I think what a lot of people don't really look at is like even maintenance wise. I feel like turbo is a lot easier to maintain. Where it comes to the supercharger, it's easier to install.
Yes and no, right? So they're both going to be, the maintenance is going to be very similar. The one difference is going to be obviously changing the supercharger fluid compared to a turbo.
Yeah.
Turbo is going to be, you do an oil change. I mean, the oil goes through the turbo, obviously it's going to get changed. So the one maintenance you're going to have with the supercharger is you're going to have to basically change supercharger oil and then just take a look and see how the belts are wearing. So, I mean, over time, superchargers will have belts wear, they'll have certain things wear. So they're going to be wear and tear items on the supercharger kit. Whereas the turbo, you're not going to have as many wear and tear items. I mean, you're not going to have a turbo, a wastegate or a blow-off valve fail on you, right? You may have a turbo fail on you, and that may be something that you need to replace. However, on a supercharger, you can have the same thing. So
with the turbo supercharger stuff, with having a turbo kit, I feel like you have more room to grow in power wise.
Yeah.
So it's not like, I feel like the supercharger, you're limited with especially pulleys. After
Correct.
you get to that last pulley, you're capped out.
And you're right. Yeah. And the supercharger is going to be all of it. Like, whereas a turbo, you can be like, cool, I want to do a wastegate setting. I want to do a 10-pound setting. I want to do a 15-pound. So you can do different settings. And that ties in back to what the ECUTech, even the Uprev, you can do 3 different settings. However, on the ECUTech software, you can do the boost control through the ECUTech. So it allows you to actually increase boost through the ECUTech software via solenoid, and that way you can have your 3 different settings with the ECUTech on the stuff.
So with ECUTech, you can do the multiple maps as well.
Correct.
And so you could basically have like a daily map and like a mid boost map,
and then like a high boost. So most guys, that's what they'll do. They'll do like a low boost, they'll do a mid boost, and do like a high boost if they're doing turbo. Now, if you're doing supercharger, you can still do the same thing. We just reduce timing and it makes less power. Because obviously supercharger is based off of RPM. So the higher you rev the RPM, the more boost you'll make. But you'll get to a point where you'll be maxed out on how much boost you can make because you can only run it so much. Like a lot of times on the supercharger kit, you'll see on a filtered setup, you'll put like an 8-pound pulley on it and it'll just stop making boost at like 13, 14 PSI because that's all it can do. You take the turbo guard off, you take the filter off, then you'll pick up another 2-3 PSI by going to a turbo guard. So that's how you could switch boost settings on a supercharger car. But it's also one of those, like, it requires a little bit more input than like a turbo. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Another thing that just came to mind was flex fuel on ECUTech.
Correct.
How does that work? Because a lot of people are curious about that.
Yep. So the way the flex fuel works on the ECUTech software is you basically will wire in a flex fuel sensor into the ECU. And then what that does, it takes a 0 to 5 voltage and it converts it over to ethanol content. So for example, 4.5 to 5 volts may be 100% ethanol, and then 0 volts is going to be 0 ethanol. So basically, as the ethanol flows through the sensor.
For since we're on the boost topic, a lot of people come in, they ask, what should I do, turbo or supercharger? What do you think? What are the pros and cons of both?
Well, I'll bounce this back to you. So you've driven both.
Okay.
So what is your preference on them?
I was a supercharger guy, like at heart at first.
Okay.
And it's amazing and it's great, but you really can't beat turbo. It's just for how the power comes in, the power delivery is just a whole different.
But if you flip and you got 3/4 of a tank of gas and you put 5 gallons of that's how you do like your E30 blend. And so ethanol content can vary, and the number after the E is going to determine the content of ethanol that is in that vehicle at that time.
Does Uprev offer any type of flex fuel? Or?
Not that I'm aware of at the moment. They may be working on something, but they do not. We still, if a client wants to come and do like a flex fuel setup, we can still do it. We do different maps, then basically we'll adjust. It's not going to be as accurate as having that sensor. You see what I'm saying?
Correct.
So that's the biggest thing. You still have the capability of doing it. It's just not going to be as accurate as if you had that flex fuel sensor inside the computer.
Correct. Well, we also do have another question, but we're going to save this one for the next pod. But thanks for having you on today.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see who we get on next, right? Yeah. Let's see if we need to get on Justin, Dylan, and talk. Let's actually get my brother on.
Yeah.
And see how it goes with him and then go from there.
Let's get George on there.
For sure. But we appreciate everybody watching. The first episode got some pretty good views and some pretty good reactions. So it should be a really cool thing. Continue to follow us, continue to support SOHO _podcast, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.